My great pleasure to come before you with, again, some thoughts about something that continues to keep happening. And that is why the encounters, why the deadly encounters, the violent encounters continue to keep happening between white cops and black men. Why? Why does it keep happening? And I want to share some thoughts with you. I want to talk about why I believe that keeps happening. Now, before we actually get started, let me make sure that all is going well with the feed. I believe it is. I believe it's going well. We're broadcasting to Facebook Live, to Periscope, Twitter, as well as to YouTube. And I think the feed is going well to all three, okay? But why does the encounter, the violent, often deadly encounter between black men and white cops continue to happen after all these many years? We could sit here and name black man after black man after black man who have had bad encounters with the police. Why does it keep happening? Why does it keep happening? Well, let me share a couple of things with you. And by the way, I looked at the George Floyd body cam video again yesterday, and it still breaks me. It breaks my heart to hear that man calling for his mom, his mother, mama, mama, mama. And then there's one point in the video where he knows his life is slipping away. And he says, "Mama, I love you." And then he mentions someone else's name and says he loved them. And then he says, "Tell my kids I love them." And shortly afterwards, he was dead. I mean, they literally choked the life out of this man for $20. For $20. He allegedly had tried to pass a bad bill for $20 is what was reported. $20. They did all of that for $20. And when I looked at the dash cam, the body cam video, he was not resisting arrest. What was happening was he was telling them, "I'm claustrophobic." He was a big man, tall guy, I think 6'5", 6'6", probably weighed, 2 something, and fitting in the back of one of those really small police cars, that small area in police cars. His mind was freaking out. His mind was telling him that he could die back there. So he was just begging them to show him some mercy. He was just begging them to take into account the fact that he was claustrophobic. He wasn't resisting. His mind was he was panicking, basically. That's not the same as resisting. And even if he had been resisting, in the state of Texas where I practice law, for example, resisting arrest is what we call a Class A misdemeanor. A Class A misdemeanor. And you know what the punishment for a Class A misdemeanor is in Texas? It is up to 1 year in jail. And most defendants don't get that. And a $4,000 fine. And again, most defendants don't get that. My point is, he should not have died. Even if they said he was resisting arrest, that is not a capital offense. That is not something that requires the death penalty. Okay? Yet they just choked the life out of that man as he cried for his mama, as he cried for help, as he begged with them, "I can't breathe. I can't breathe." They could care less. They could not have cared less. Derek Chauvin, who had his knee on his neck, the other officers who were holding his legs. I think one of the officers said something about, "Can we turn him over?" But he didn't do much of anything. People were standing there telling the police officers to let him up. He was having a heart attack. They could not have cared less. They literally choked the life out of this man for $20. Why does this keep happening? And then we recently saw another example of Jacob Blake, who was shot in the back 7 times because he allegedly resisted arrest and was trying to get to his car. And he was shot 7 times in the back, leaving him crippled. There were other things that could have been done in the Jacob Blake case. There were other things that could have been done in the George Floyd case. And then there's the example here, very recent, of the black man in Rochester, New York, who was having a mental episode, and it was cold and snowy and raining, and reportedly his brother called for some help because the man was having some mental health issues, some mental health challenges. Police got there, and you saw him on the video. The man was nude on this winter night. Not only was it raining, it was actually snowing, sleeting or something. And he was out there nude. They put cuffs on him, had him sitting there. Then they put a bag over his face because they said he was spitting, and he said that he was COVID-19 infected. But then what happened is, you see it on video where they begin to hold him down, and he too couldn't breathe. And yet they held him down and held him down and held him down. Why does this keep happening? And I could go on and on with other examples. Why does it keep happening? And why does it keep happening with black men in particular? Now, we know that more white men, cops kill more white men than black men. That's because there are many more white men in the country. We only make up 13% of the population. So there are not as many black men in the country as white men. So quite naturally, more white men are going to be killed by the cops than black men. But that doesn't tell the story. What tells the story is how disproportionate black men are killed by white officers. I mean, black men are killed, are more likely to die from encounters with police officers many more times. I think 2.5, 3 times more. Okay? That's what tells the story. That's the issue. Why does it keep happening? I want to offer a couple of things. Now, there are a couple of legal reasons why this keep happening. Okay? And I've talked about this before, but it just bears repeating. It has to be said over and over and over and over again until it gets into the psyche of America. So here are 2 legal reasons why this keeps happening. One is a term called qualified immunity. Qualified immunity. Immunity is when someone is basically above the law. They do wrong, but they have immunity. They can't be prosecuted. The law will not hold them accountable for what they did in most circumstances. And there are different types of immunity. You got diplomatic immunity, where folks who are here as diplomats from other countries can do certain things. They'll not be held accountable under certain circumstances because of their diplomatic status. That's diplomatic immunity. You have absolute immunity. And that's where, for example, in most cases, you can't sue a judge for the rulings that the judge makes because the judge has immunity, oftentimes absolute immunity. But what police officers have is a qualified immunity, okay? Which means that it's not absolute immunity, but it is oftentimes implemented in a way that protects them from most of the things they do. And it's applicable in the civil law cases. So when a police officer, for example, is sued, that is the first thing that his attorney or her attorney is going to raise: qualified immunity. He has qualified immunity. Doesn't have absolute immunity, but he has qualified immunity. So what happens is, if the person, the victim, did anything to contribute to the officer's actions, most likely that case is going to be thrown out on what we call summary judgment. Won't go to trial. It'll never see the light of day. It'll never get in front of a jury because, again, of the qualified immunity. It's qualified in that it's not absolute, but again, if the victim did anything, resisted arrest, evaded arrest, fought the officer, had a gun, almost anything, that's going to excuse that officer's behavior, give that officer immunity in civil court. Now, how does that affect this whole thing? Well, think about it. If officers know that they can do this stuff and their cases, and if they get sued, the case is going to be thrown out by the judge, then there is no incentive for them to change their behavior. There is no motivation for them to think before they act. There's no motivation at all, because they know 9 times out of 10, the case is going to get thrown out of court by summary judgment. That is qualified immunity, and we need to get rid of it. Police officers, yes, have a dangerous job. I was looking at some video the other day about how some police encounters can go very, very wrong, and the police officer can end up dead or shot or what have you very easily. I understand that. But a lot of us do deadly jobs, dangerous jobs. But that doesn't mean our behavior should be above prosecution. It doesn't mean that our behavior should be above accountability. We shouldn't have some sort of immunity, because that breeds the type of behavior that we're seeing. So qualified immunity needs to be done away with. It needs to be repealed. And it's something that Congress can do, the U.S. Congress, or it is something that SCOTUS can do. The U.S. Supreme Court can get rid of qualified immunity in the next case that comes in front of it, having to do with excessive force, police brutality. They can get rid of it very, very easily. Okay? But the Supreme Court, SCOTUS, has given tremendous deference to police officers, which brings me to the next legal reason why this keeps happening, is because of 2 U.S. Supreme Court cases. One of them is Tennessee versus Garner. I did a whole video on this. Go to our YouTube, go to our law firm YouTube channel, Corbett and Corbett, and look up the video about whether police officers can shoot a fleeing felon. And I discussed the Tennessee v. Garner case. I won't spend much time here, but essentially it says that police officers cannot legally shoot a person who is running from them, even if that person has allegedly committed a felony, if that person running away is not a threat of committing some substantial harm to the police officer or to someone else. Okay? That's what the Tennessee versus Garner case. So think about that. Once again, if the person, even in the commission of a felony, is running from the police officer, his back is to the police officer. Okay? He's running away from the police officer. Just a moment. But he has no No, the person is the man running away has no weapons. He's not a threat to anyone. He's not in a situation where he really can harm anyone. Then the Tennessee v. Garner case says the police officers cannot legally shoot that man. But flip the facts a little bit, okay? Let's say that he's running and he does have some sort of weapon or something that can be used as a deadly weapon, okay? Then now the police can shoot the person legally. So the Tennessee v. Garner case does make it unlawful when police officers shoot someone who's fleeing and who's unarmed and is not a threat, but change the facts just a little bit, and they can. Now, the Tennessee v. Garner case tends to come into play mostly in criminal court, okay? And it's not the only case. There's another one, Graham v. Connor. And that case really qualifies the Tennessee Garner case. It basically says police officers do a dangerous job. They make split-second decisions. When we're looking back at what they've done, Monday morning quarterbacking, we need to look back from the perspective of the police and all of this. So it gives the police a lot of protection, that Graham v. Connor case. So because of these two U.S. Supreme Court cases, once again, police officers learn in the academy that they can get away with most of the behavior that they're getting away with. And that's why we keep seeing, despite the protests, despite the turmoil, despite even the rioting and looting and turn the city upside down, and despite all of that, the goodwill, the good words, the kind words spoken by police chiefs and mayors and all of that, and condolences and all, despite all of that, police officers continue to do the same thing. Legally, you understand why now. Number one, qualified immunity. Number two, because of two U.S. Supreme Court cases. Tennessee v. Garner, if the facts are in such a way, and Graham v. Connor, if the facts are in their favor. Between those legal reasons, qualified immunity, as well as those two Supreme Court cases, police officers know that they're not going to be held accountable, most likely in civil court. In other words, they're not going to get sued, and they can get sued, but the case is going to get thrown out and they're not going to lose anything. In fact, the police union will pay for their attorneys. So for them, it's nothing. And a lot of times, you know, they get paid leave. So it's like a vacation, actually. And in some cases, the public will start one of these GoFundMe pages and send them a whole bunch of money. So when you got that qualified immunity and those U.S. Supreme Court cases protecting you in criminal court, what's the incentive to stop this violent behavior toward black men? What's the incentive? In fact, the qualified immunity in these other cases are in place because whites know the folks who makes these decisions, the people who are sitting on the U.S. Supreme Court, know that oftentimes the police is in place to police black men. So they don't want to take power from the police when they expect the police to control black men particularly. So there's no incentive to change this. So what do? We vote. We vote like crazy. We vote, we vote, we vote, we vote, and we vote. Why? Because then we can get people in place who can nominate Supreme Court justices who would be open to getting rid of qualified immunity, who would be willing to overturn Tennessee v. Garner or Graham versus Connor, those two cases. But we got to vote to get the right politicians in place who can then nominate the right people. We got to vote to get the right people in Congress who can do something about this legislatively. So voting is the big deal. Voting. And in just about 2 months, we'll have an opportunity. In fact, it's a few days less than 2 months. We'll have the opportunity to make our voices heard. You make sure you go vote. You make sure you go vote. Make sure. Now, the second reason why these violent encounters between cops and black men continue to happen is because of a reckless disregard for black life. Bottom line, a reckless disregard for black life. Now, that's the motivation in many cases. Other cases, it's just flat out murder. I mean, it is intentional conduct. It's not a disregard for life. It's intentional. It's done for the purpose of killing someone. Okay? That's murder. So there have been murders. The police officer who shot Walter Scott in the back was convicted of murder and sent to prison. Amber Geiger, who shot Botham Jean, claiming that she thought he was in her apartment. She's in prison for murder. So sometimes it is murder. Many other times it is a flat, reckless disregard for black life. A disregard, a reckless disregard for black life. Now let me give you a definition. I'm in my Black's Law Dictionary. And reckless disregard is defined as a conscious indifference to the consequences of an act. A conscious indifference. Let me talk about that a moment. A conscience, anything that you do consciously, you're doing it aware of it. You're doing it knowing what you're doing. It's not like it happened in the heat of the moment or something we call in the law because of sudden passion or a sudden emergency. No, this is conscience. And we saw that with George Floyd. We saw that police officer with his knee on George's neck for 8 minutes and 46 seconds, I believe it was, or 47 seconds. And many make the argument that it wasn't just a disregard for black life, for George's life, but it was intentional. It was murder. Okay? But a conscience indifference, conscience meaning you're aware of it, but you're indifferent, which means you don't care. Who cares about this black man who's dying under my knee? Who cares? I don't care about him. This is just a black man. His life means nothing. He has no value. He's a thug. He's a criminal. He's a nigger. He's worthless. Who cares if he dies? I don't care if he dies. I don't care if this is the end of his life. I don't care that he can't breathe. I don't care anything about any of that because this is a black life. And that's why we've started saying Black lives matter. Black lives matter. Why do they matter? They matter because black lives matter because we are all made in the image of God. God's imprint is on every life. Every life is valuable to God. And so that's why black lives matter. That's why black lives matter. Because we're made in God's image like everyone else. Forget the fact that we have more melanin in our skin or other physical characteristics that are different from whites or from this race or from that ethnicity, forget that. Let's get beneath that. And let's just look at the fact that black people are spirit beings made in the image of God who have souls and live in physical bodies just like everyone else. But police officers, white police officers, have shown us they have a reckless disregard for our life. Again, go back to George Floyd. If you got your knee on someone's neck and they're down there handcuffed, can't move, begging you to let them catch a breath, what harm is there to let this man sit up? You still got him restrained. His hands are behind his back. He's literally dying. I mean, he was taking less. I don't know if you've ever witnessed anyone dying. I have several times. And their breath gets faint and more faint and more faint and more faint and more faint, more faint until they just stop breathing. That's literally what happened with George Floyd. For 8 minutes and 47 seconds, his breath went from mama, 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 mama. I love you, mama. I love you, mama. Mama, mama, I love you. And he said someone, and then tell my kids I love them. I mean, isn't that a clue when he says, tell my kids I love them? Isn't that a clue that he's in the process of dying? You can't let this man sit up and catch his breath? All because of $20? This is ridiculous. I'm trying to contain myself. That was one of the most heartless, callous, hateful acts I've ever seen anybody commit, especially for someone who wears a badge. And who's entrusted to serve and protect. Awful. This has been happening for so long in this country that many people don't even see it as a problem. Let me read you something else. Let me read you the definition of the word lynch. Because we think a lynching is only by choking someone to death with a rope from a tree or from something that they're hanging from. But lynching is when a mob kills someone without legal authority. That's a lynching. When a mob, when a group of people kills someone without legal authority, that's a lynching. Whether it's hanging by the tree, whether it is knee on their neck, whether it is shooting them in the back, all of that can fall under the definition of a lynching. What I'm saying to you is lynching is still occurring in this country. Lynching of black men is still occurring. Don't just think about it in terms of hanging from a tree. Black men are still getting lynched in this country. George Floyd was lynched. Pure and simple. He was lynched. They did not have the legal authority to choke the life out of that man. He wasn't resisting arrest. He couldn't. He was restrained with handcuffs, and then three cops total were holding him down. And even when it appeared that he was resisting by not wanting to get in the police car, again, that was him panicking. He told them, I'm claustrophobic. And you know why I talk about that with such passion? Because I've been in that exact same situation. I was arrested last year, 2019, unlawfully, because I was protesting my family being racially profiled. And the manager, who was a black guy, an African American, called the police on us. And me, my daughter, who's also an attorney, my son, were all arrested at the church. I had just finished preaching. And we just stood up against being racially profiled. And this black manager called the police on us. And we were arrested. And they falsely said that we criminally trespassed and that we failed to ID. Both were lies. Both were lies. And they handcuffed us. And I'm a big man, or, relatively speaking. I'm like 6'3". I weigh 275, 280. And those police cars got about that much space in the back. And when they took me down to the police car to try to get me in the car, I felt the same thing George Floyd felt. I felt like there's no way I could fit in the back of that car. My mind was telling me if I was put in the back of that car, I would die. I would suffocate back there. This was my mind. This was just me reacting. This was not me resisting. I wasn't like George Floyd kept saying. He kept telling them. So you could hear one of the officers saying to him, you can't win. You can't win. And Mr. Floyd was like, I'm not trying to win. That's not what I'm thinking at all. I'm not trying to win. I'm a good man. I'm a good guy. And then folks came out and were again calling on the police officer, let the man, do something else. Don't force him back in that car because he's claustrophobic. So he was panicking. His mind had taken over. It was full of fear. I felt that same way. Fortunately for me, one of the police officers said, let's get the SUV. And they brought an SUV to take me to the jail. Put me in an SUV. I am grateful today to God and to whoever that officer was who showed me enough compassion to say, no, let's not try to put him back in that little space back there. That's all they had to do with George. That's all they had to do with George. Just get a van or anything so he could get, he was just afraid of getting back in that little small space. He wasn't resisting. He begged them. And had someone just had enough regard for his life, his humanity, to say, well, let's just get a bigger vehicle. I believe George would have cooperated and got into that vehicle. And he would have went to jail and they would have dealt with it in the court system. Again, all it was about was $20. And George was restrained. He was handcuffed. He was no threat to anyone. But because of this reckless disregard for black life, especially for the lives of black men, they didn't show him any humanity. They didn't show him any compassion, any empathy. They treated him like he was nobody. And that's the second reason why we continue to see these violent, vicious, dangerous, often deadly, fatal encounters between white cops and black men. It's time for it to stop. It is time for it to stop. Just yesterday, a police officer rode real slowly by me. I was out having some recreational time, my wife and I, and this police officer rode by real slowly. And I did something that I had never done before. When he rolled by, I froze. I froze just like this. And I don't have a fear of cops. As an attorney, I work with cops. I know cops. Cops are some of my best friends. But with all that we see, subconsciously, I froze just to see what he was going to do. We weren't doing anything illegal. I was trying to get my drone calibrated because I was out flying my drone yesterday, just kind of for recreation. But he rolled by real slow. And after he passed by, we spoke. Once he spoke, I kind of got out of that state of being frozen, because I figured, okay, this is a friendly situation. But I think that's where a lot of black people are. We just don't know what we're going to get when we're dealing with the police. We just don't know. I mean, you can be a law-abiding, good citizen who comply and do everything right and still get killed. Philando Castile is an example. And I could think of others. This has to stop. This has to stop. Donald Trump said of the police officers who shot Jacob Blake that they choked. They could have done something different than shooting him in the back, Trump said, but they choked like someone who's putting in a golf game. Comparing such a situation to a golf game is reprehensible, first and foremost. And it's not choking. It is a reckless disregard for life, or it's intentional murder. It's not choking. Now, I'm going to be fair and say again, police officers have a dangerous job, and they sometimes can walk up on situations that can go bad fast. No questions about that. But a lot of the situations we see, they could have handled a lot better, a lot different, a whole lot different. Jacob Blake, that could have been handled completely different. George Floyd, absolutely different. 8 minutes and 46 seconds may not seem like a long time, but when I watched George Floyd's funeral, memorial, And Ben Crump, his attorney, his family's attorney, had everyone just do nothing for 8 minutes and 46 seconds. It seemed like an hour. I mean, they had time to think this through and do something different. But because of a reckless disregard for black life, or just flat out murder, first degree, oftentimes these encounters end up being deadly, fatal for black men. So again, let me end by telling you, encouraging you, whatever you do, you vote. You go vote. You go vote. A lot of these elections are won or lost based on just a few people not voting. Just a few. You may think, my vote doesn't count. My vote doesn't mean anything. How wrong you are. How wrong you are. They don't, that's why they don't want you to vote. That's why they fought so hard for us not to have the right to vote. Because they know your vote can turn the tides. I love what Reverend Jesse Jackson Sr. says. Hands that once picked cotton can now pick presidents. You go vote. Elections have real life consequences, especially for us African Americans. The wrong president, the wrong Senate Majority Leader, the wrong Speaker of the House, the wrong District Attorney, the wrong governor, and man, we could be in trouble as a race of people. Our ancestors knew the importance of voting. And you got to vote. You got to vote. You got to vote. All right. Thank you for listening. Please share this tape. Share this video. Do a watch party. Get this out to as many people as possible. I am in a fight for justice, and it's a biblical fight. Okay, this is the gospel that I'm preaching, by the way. This is not political. This is the gospel. Jesus demands us to demand justice for the vulnerable. This is the work of God. Don't put me in a category like, with folks that you consider to be politicians and radicals and militant and all of that, No, I'm a gospel preacher. I'm also an attorney, but first and foremost, I'm a gospel preacher. And when I read my Bible, I read many, 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 many scriptures that tell us Christians to seek justice. That's what I'm doing, and I do it daily, either as an attorney or as a preacher. Get in this fight of justice with us. Thank you again.